Hey everyone, welcome to this month's Wellness Wiki. Dr. Brian Stenzler here with a good friend of mine, Dr. Roseann Capanna-Hodge. And today's topic is the number one way to get your kids' behavior to improve. Well, I'm really excited about this topic, and Dr. Rowe has been a good friend of mine for the last few years, and she is definitely one of the top mental health experts out there. And you know what? Her bio will be in the show notes, whether you watch this in Wellness Wikis or on YouTube or wherever it is. You'll read her bio. I don't want to spend too much time talking about how amazing she is. You'll hear it. I want to keep this Wellness Wiki blog to about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to do our best to stay on track. And one of the things I want to make sure that all of you know about, because I know not everyone is going to listen the full time, because maybe you have to go pick up your kids or something like that. But I know you're going to come back to it. But just in case, Dr. Rowe does have an amazing podcast. I just want you to just talk about that for like 2 seconds, let them know how they could find it, and then we could wrap up at the end and maybe talk a little bit more about it.
Well, thanks for that awesome intro. So I have this awesome podcast. It's called It's Going to Be Okay. And it's designed to be a resource or the resource for parents with kids that have behavioral or mental health issues and short actionable episodes. It's called It's Going to Be Okay with Dr. Roseann. You can go to www.drroseann.com/podcast to find it, or it's on all the major platforms.
Awesome. And I'm so excited. You have 20,000. I mean, how many downloads? And you just started. I'm so excited for you. You know, folks, you all know that I wrote the book, Dream Wellness, the 5 Keys to Raising Kids for a Lifetime of Physical and Mental Health. So when they start asking me questions about children's all mental health issues and behavioral issues, I'm like, I got to talk to Dr. Rowe. I'm talking about the health sides of it. I'm not talking about behavior. So Dr. Rowe is my expert, my go-to person. So look, when we said that you're going to come up with the number one way to get your kids' behavior to improve, look, I've got a 7-year-old son. And so he's going to be dealing with big emotions, big feelings, big changes in school. His friends will too. He's going to have to really understand socializing. So this is not only for my audience here, for all of you watching, but this is for me too as a parent. And I know my wife, Brooke, is going to love watching this too. So I would love you to just start giving some good strategies. We know that kids' mental health is at an all-time low. There are more issues than ever before. I'd love to get your insight as to why you think that is, and just talk about some of these strategies and how we can get them to work.
Yeah. And, your 7-year-old, by the way, Brian, he's not a little guy anymore. You know what I mean? He's starting to move up, but we're going to have a conversation about how to support kids' mental health, and it's kids of all ages. So whether you have a 3-year-old, a 10-year-old, or a 27-year-old, this is a relevant conversation. And we're going to talk about something that is really surprising and really the number one way to improve a child's mental health is actually to regulate yourself. And you're like, say what, Roseann? What you talking about, Willis? This is really the truth. So this isn't self-care. This is something called co-regulation. And our children regulate off of us. So when we got it together, our kids actually not just feel that, they see it in our body language, they hear it in our tone of voice. And on top of that, when we have it together, we have a lot more patience for our typical behaviors, which might be frustrating, as well as when your child has a clinical issue like ADHD or autism or sensory integration, whatever is going on. And this is really something that I think people don't talk enough about. And it's not a point of shame or blame. This is a point of action, because there's so much we can do for ourselves that actually have such a direct impact on our children.
I love that. And also I want everyone that's listening to know, or watching this, however you're getting this information, is this is not just for the parent. This could be any caregiver. This could be for the grandparents. I have my parents come out and visit, from New York, and they spend time with my son, aunts, uncles, and any form of caregiver. This is really important for them to work on as well as. So yeah, I just wanted to mention.
And that's a great point, Brian, because, when you think about your kids, particularly in the younger grades, when they just have one main teacher, when it's going to be a good year for your kid because of the way that teacher makes your child feel. Right. And it's not what they're saying, it's how they say it. And so when we think about co-regulation, right, there's the part where there's a direct impact on our kid. There's also the indirect, because we're role modeling all the time, right? And so, when we dive into co-regulation, what does that actually look like in the real world, right? So, when you're at home and your child didn't do their homework, like today, my son, he's very orderly. He's a Virgo, and they like structure and order. And he's very independent. He's always been great at managing his homework. But I was like, why do you have your computer in the bathroom before we leave for school? And I go, did you finish your homework? And he basically he didn't lie, but he massaged the answer. Okay. And he said, I'm just finishing up, he says to me. So he didn't say no. So I could have been like Giancarlo Hodge, or sometimes we say Hodge because the Italians can't pronounce Hodge. So they say our name Hodge. And I said, oh, okay. Are you going to be able to get that done? Yeah. Okay, fine. And he did. He got it done. So, this isn't a kid that does it all the time. But if I had said, I can't believe it, last night, what would have happened, right? I would have dysregulated. He would have dysregulated. What would he have learned, right? Now, when he gets home today, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit him down and I'm going to say, Giancarlo, let's get out our Google Classroom and just check through. Do we want to repeat it yesterday? No. Okay. What's a better solution? So I like to really focus on solutions, right? So when our kids are really struggling with self-regulation, and what does dysregulation actually look like? Can look for like understimulated behaviors or overstimulated behaviors. Understimulated, forgetfulness, inattention, withdrawn behaviors, overstimulated, hyperactivity, anger, snappiness or irritability, right? And kids can go through those types of behaviors for totally normal developmental reasons. And we worry about them if they're clinical when they occur for extended periods of time, right? So if you see something and it's going on for a while, take some action. But the best way to start, and you're dealing with your kid, communicating with your kid, is to put your oxygen mask on first, right? So this morning, I felt myself bubble, Brian. There's no doubt. But then I was like, okay, this kid never does that. You can't be perfect. And he didn't try to get a pass to get out of this homework. He did it. Right. So, and I will remind him, because he does not like to do things last minute. And I'm sure he genuinely forgot. So sometimes it's just a matter of gentle reminders. Right. And, your children are picking up everything from you. So how I managed that situation with him wasn't just about the interaction that I had with him. It's how I manage stress in general. Right. He's looking at me to keep it together. And that's how he's watching. So if he sees me, yelling at somebody in a store or some other component, right? I remember I was with my teenager, who's a whole lot more, he's the most sensitive person in the house. It always has been. And we were going to pick something up. And all of a sudden my phone rang and it said Meta. And I said, oh my God, it's Facebook calling me. I am so mad at them, right? And I still haven't gotten my account back after 11 months. So he puts his hands on his ears because he knew, right? And so I didn't yell at him. And I said, oh, I'm so glad you're calling me. Like, why are you calling me? And it was something unrelated. And I read the guy a riot act in a very appropriate way. And afterwards, I said, hey, Max, was that as bad as you thought it was going to be? And he said, no. And I said, well, why did you cover your ears? And he was like, I was afraid of what you were going to say. And I said, should I have said something different? And he said, no. And we had a point of conversation. And, my kid is a very sensitive kid, and I have to be very careful with him. If I'm neutral, he takes it a certain way. If I am angry, he really doesn't take it well. And there's times that you should be angry with your kids, right? But if you have one emotion and it's irritation and anger, what kind of message is that sending to your kid? So monitoring your tone, monitoring your body language, and self-care, like doing things for your nervous system to regulate, so that today, when I wondered where my kid was, he was hiding in the bathroom with his computer, he was actually double dutying it. He's a guy, you know what I mean, Brian? So, but we have to make sure we really are being appropriate, and we can't always think about things from a discipline perspective. We've got to think about things from a learning perspective. Today was a learning opportunity for my kid.
Yeah. And I love that too, because being a loud New Yorker myself, it's hard to manage my tone. And I notice sometimes, my tone could be better. And I notice when I do things a certain way, my son does that too. And he speaks to me back that way, and it's not okay. So that's great advice. Thank you. I gotta manage myself.
I'm almost New Yorker. I'm on the border, but like I live on the town that's the border. But tone, loudness, and irritation, right? So my teenager is more sensitive to it. So I have to be careful, right? We also are very playful house. So we do a lot of fun kind of stuff. And I feel that humor is the greatest diffuser. Like I can talk about heavy, heavy stuff with my kids with humor and get away with a lot. And like, my 12-year-old, he's going through the change, right? You know what I mean? So I do a lot of humor around that. Like if he's cranky and I'm like, if there ain't no attitude or gratitude, forget about it. And now as soon as I say it, he just starts cracking up. He can't even be mad at me. You know what I mean? So, or if they're cranky, I was like, my husband and I are like, you need a hug. And then we chase our kids around and we do hugging on them, and they love it. They hate it and they love it at the same time. They literally stop and wait for us to hug them. So, you can't just do some of these things. And if you're listening or watching and you're like, well, I where do I start? You just start, right? But with all things, if this is about learning for yourself and your kid, you need a constancy. You're not going to just all of a sudden have a hug fest like the Hodges and it's a one and done. This is what we do literally every day. Like we're annoying, right? Like this in our house. And I need humor. Like I think it's just such an amazing thing. And it allows me not to take things so seriously, right? Like my kid not doing his homework one time is very different from your kid never doing your homework every day. If your kid is struggling every day in a non-angry time, you've really got to figure out what's the root cause of that. Did your kid have an attention problem? Is there a learning problem? Is there a depression? Something is stopping your child, right? And if it is always a point of friction and your kid is very capable of doing their homework per your teacher, the teacher's like, yes, they do all their work. This isn't your opinion. You've had a conversation. Then, maybe this is just something that you conflict about because you're struggling with the communication with your child. And maybe it's time on all those things to seek some help.
I think that's such great advice. You make it so simple and it's counterintuitive. You think if a kid is misbehaving, if they're not self-regulating, we assume it's the kid's problem, the kid's fault, which sometimes it is. But more than likely, if the parents aren't checking themselves, there's going to be some major issues. So I love that. So, if you're watching this and you're like, and your kid's not behaving the way that you think they should be behaving, then check yourself, look in the mirror and just see, because kids love to play follow the leader. Are you being the leader that you want them to follow? That's something
right.
To consider.
So a lot of times people like do what I say, not what I do. That's just not the way it works, and, and also too, a lot of parents, first of all, we all learn to parent from our parents. Okay. And we're changing. There's such an evolution. It's such a fast level, Brian. Like, how do you manage technology? How do you do this? I mean, we had like Atari when we were growing up, and we had cable, we had a lockbox on our cable. There was not devices. It just wasn't that way. And when it comes to modern parenting, we keep what our parents told us that are great and our values, and they can be anchors, but we need different techniques. And I think one of the biggest things, and a conversation I have with every single parent, I work with parents all over the world, and so it's the same conversation, is my child doing this on purpose? So many parents think kids' behavior is very intentful, very purposeful. And I'm here to tell you that's not the way the brain works. So a lot of times behaviors happen on a more autonomic level where the subconscious is acting in a certain way. And particularly with, kids, they just don't know another way, whether they're lacking a coping skill or they have poor stress management or they are doing purposeful avoidant behaviors to avoid a punishment. Right. And, it really has to become a point of, I always say to parents, remove yourself. And this is where self-regulation is important. Pull yourself back, take an aerial view, try to look at the pieces as to why this is happening. Right. And don't look at it through that emotional lens, which is not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. You have to try to be a little more problematic not problematic. Look at the problem and try to figure out, why is this happening? And if you need help, ask for help. Go to a counselor for yourself who does parenting and maybe can start in that way. We try to give up our power as parents. And so many parents go to a physician and ask for help. And what do they recommend? Psych meds, maybe counseling if you're lucky. Really, the biggest influence on a kid's lifelong mental health, we know through research, is parent mental health, and actually maternal mental health is the number one determinant of a child's lifelong mental health. So people should be empowered by that, not frightened or overwhelmed by that. You have to say, wait, I have it. And it all starts with that co-regulation between a parent and a child.
That is awesome. I have so many more questions that I had jotted down, but for the sake of time, I think that is a really good place to leave it. But is there anything else that you wanted to share from the questions that I shared with you beforehand, and anything else that we're going to leave out? Or do you think that wraps it up pretty well?
Yeah, I think, when you're listening to this, take one small action and stick with it, right? So if it's for you and starting with you and doing breath work every day, or you're making dietary changes, whatever you need to do to regulate, start. And if you can try to include your kids in that, it just becomes much easier. And even teenagers will do stuff. People will say, oh, my kids won't do that, and just ask. And when you start doing it yourself and they see what's happening to you, they're just much more likely to do it with you.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I'm sure you probably cover some of this stuff in your book. It's going to be okay. Also, you cover that.
I do. And on the podcast, we talk all about it too. The podcast is really designed for parents that are looking for ways to support their child's behavior and mental health because they know something's going on. I wanted it to be a resource. We're not giving direct support for parents who have kids with clinical issues. And that's what I've done my whole life. And I want to share that with people.
That's awesome. And how often are you doing the podcast? Is it a weekly podcast?
Well, right now it's every day.
Every day. Oh my gosh. And
5 days a week. So we'll be doing it multiple times a week. We don't know if it's going to stay at 5 or stay at 3. People are listening every day. So we'll see what happens with Dr. Rowe and her time, but they're short episodes just like this. They're 10, 15-minute episodes because we're busy.
Brilliant. I love it. And the beautiful thing is they could catch up, because podcasts, they could just watch one after another. So forget binge watching Netflix, binge watch Dr. Rowe.
That's right.
So, Dr. Rowe, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing with our audience all about this, the number one way to get your kids' behavior to improve. I know I'm going to put this into action. And for all of you out there, I hope you enjoyed this. Please share this wiki with someone else. And until next time, we look forward to helping you and your family live your dream every day.